Beneath these streets lies a lost Roman city. But there's something far older here. The world's oldest wooden wheel with an axle. Older than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Ljubljana hides a story no one expects to find here. But most travel guides reduce it to a list of attractions. And the story that ties them all together is rarely told. 12 places, 12 chapters, one story. Each chapter leads to the next, until it all makes sense. By the end, you won't just see the city's highlights. You'll understand why Ljubljana became the city it is today. Something incredible was uncovered on the outskirts of Ljubljana. Something most people have never even heard of. Beneath the mud of what was once a vast marsh, archaeologists discovered the world's oldest wooden wheel with an axle. It dates back more than 5,500 years. But the real surprise, the wheel belonged to a long-lost civilization. A prehistoric community that built entire villages on stilts across these marshes. Today, we know them as the Pile Dwellers. And when, over thousands of years, the marshes gradually shrank, their villages disappeared. Yet, the objects they left behind survived. Tools, weapons, pottery, dugout canoes carved from a single tree trunks, and most remarkably, the ancient wheel and its axle, now preserved in Ljubljana City Museum. What archaeologists uncovered here proved so important that these pile-dwelling sites became part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You can walk through a reconstructed pile-dwelling village at the immersive Morostik Visitor Center just south of Ljubljana. Still, we know remarkably little about this lost civilization. Their villages vanished, but their highway survived. The Ljubljanica River. For thousands of years, it carried trading boats, travelers, and ideas. Today, life in Ljubljana unfolds along its banks. This is where the city's cafe culture thrives, where friends meet after work and spend hours catching up beside the river. But according to local legend, this river once carried one very unusual traveler, Jason, the Greek hero. After stealing the Golden Fleece, Jason and the Argonauts supposedly sailed all the way here. But when they reached these marshes, something terrifying was waiting for them. A giant dragon. Jason fought the beast and defeated it, or so the legend says, because somehow the dragon ended up as a true winner. Today, most visitors forget the hero, but remember the dragon. It appears on Ljubljana's flag, local beer, throughout souvenir shops, and as the guardian of one of city's most famous landmarks, Dragon Bridge. Completed in 1901, this Art Nouveau landmark was one of Europe's first reinforced concrete bridges. 4 enormous dragons stand at its corners, watching over everyone who crosses the river. Locals even say that if a true virgin walks across the bridge, one of the dragons will wag its tail. Whether you believe that is entirely up to you. But one thing is certain. After more than 2,000 years, Ljubljana's dragon still guards the city. And Jason belongs to legend. But beneath the nearby streets is something completely real. An entire lost Roman city. Every time a new building is constructed, archaeologists risk uncovering another Roman ruin. Because the lost Roman city isn't one attraction. Its remains are scattered beneath the entire city. Around 2,000 years ago, the Romans founded the prosperous town of Emona. It had paved streets, sewers, public baths, temples, and mighty defensive walls. Everything you'd expect from a thriving Roman city. But then, it vanished. No one knows exactly why Emona was abandoned. But we do know that the Roman world around it was falling apart. Attila the Hun was just one of many invaders in the region. And when the Roman Empire began to crumble, Emona slowly faded away. Roofs collapsed. Streets disappeared beneath layers of soil. Nature slowly reclaimed the city. Several remains of Emona can be visited across Ljubljana as part of the Emona Archaeopark, managed by the city museum. But most of the Roman city was recycled. Stone by stone, its structures were dismantled, and their materials reused by the people who came after them. Centuries later, Slavic settlers established a new community just a stone's throw away. Their settlement grew in a narrow strip of land between the Ljubljanica River and the Castle Hill. The river carried trade. The hill provided protection, and between them, medieval Ljubljana began to take shape. Its location was ideal, on an important trade route connecting the ports of the Adriatic Sea with the royal cities of Central Europe. Merchants arrived, craftsmen opened workshops, and the settlement expanded along 3 squares that still form the heart of Ljubljana's old town today: Stari Trg, Old Square; Mestni Trg, Town Square; and Gornji Trg, Upper Square. Today, they form a lively pedestrian district filled with small shops, cafes, and restaurants. But as you walk along these old cobbled streets, you're still following the shape of that medieval city. Despite its modest size, medieval Ljubljana became the administrative center of the region. Most residents spoke Slovene, while government and administration used German. It was a division that would shape the city for centuries. Then, in 1335, Ljubljana came under the rule of one of Europe's most powerful dynasties, the Habsburgs. They would influence its architecture, politics, and culture for nearly 6 centuries. And above the old town, one place became the clearest symbol of their power: Ljubljana Castle. From up here, Ljubljana's rulers could watch over one of the region's most important crossroads. And what they saw coming from the southeast was very terrifying. A powerful new empire was expanding towards Central Europe: the Ottoman Empire. Ljubljana ended up right on the frontier between 2 great imperial powers, the Christian Habsburgs and the Islamic Ottomans. For more than 2 centuries, Ottoman armies repeatedly raided the surrounding region. Imagine standing on these castle walls 500 years ago, scanning the distant hills, not for beautiful views, but for smoke. A signal fire warning that another Ottoman raid was approaching. When the alarm was raised, people fled behind these walls. Villages burned, the countryside was devastated. But the castle grew into a powerful fortress. The city below grew stronger too. It survived every Ottoman raid. But no fortress could protect it from a powerful earthquake that struck in 1511. Most buildings were badly damaged. As the city recovered, its medieval appearance gradually began to change. Over the next 2 centuries, Ljubljana reinvented itself. And it did so in style. Trade was bringing greater wealth to the city. So merchants, bishops, and Habsburg officials wanted Ljubljana to reflect its growing importance. So they invited architects, sculptors, and painters from the Italian lands to reshape it. Medieval buildings gradually gave way to elegant palaces, fountains, public squares. And St. Nicholas Cathedral is the greatest example of that era. Inspired by the great Baroque churches of Italy, it replaced an older medieval church. Marble columns, gilded details, sculptures, and dramatic ceiling frescoes painted by the Italian artists. Together, they transformed the interior into one enormous work of art. But while the architects and builders were busy laying stone and mortar, Protestant reformers were laying the foundations of a nation. A priest named Primož Trubar published the first books ever printed in Slovene, the Slavic language spoken here by ordinary people. Few could have imagined it then, but those first books would strengthen Slovene identity and inspire the dream of a nation. And one day, Ljubljana would become its capital. But strangely, the next person to strengthen that national awakening wasn't Slovene, but one of history's greatest conquerors. After almost 5 centuries of Habsburg rule, Napoleon's French forces occupied Ljubljana. But the greatest surprise was still to come. Ljubljana stood at the crossroads between Italy, Central Europe and the Balkans. And Napoleon saw its potential, so he quickly turned this small provincial city into the capital of his new territory, the Illyrian provinces. The French also gave Slovene a more visible role in education and public life, accelerating the growing Slovene cultural awakening. This chapter is remembered here in French Revolution Square. At its center stands a monument to the Illyrian provinces. But French rule was brief. Soon, Napoleon was defeated, and the Habsburgs reclaimed Ljubljana. German once again dominated government and administration in the city. But Napoleon's influence couldn't simply be erased. Across Europe, revolutionary ideas continued to spread, and that wave of changes brought some of Europe's most powerful rulers to this very square. Emperors, kings, princes and diplomats spent several months here in 1821. Napoleon was gone, but uprisings inspired by the revolutionary era were threatening Europe's restored political order, so its monarchs met here to decide how to stop them. The square was enlarged and prepared for the gathering, and that event gave it the name it still carries today: Congress Square. For several extraordinary months, decisions made in Ljubljana affected the balance of power across Europe. Eventually, the rulers left, and Ljubljana returned to quiet provincial life. More than 70 years passed. Then, the ground beneath the city began to move again. On Easter Sunday, 1895, a devastating earthquake struck Ljubljana. Buildings cracked, roofs collapsed, and much of the city was badly damaged. For many cities, that might have marked the beginning of decline. For Ljubljana, it became the beginning of another remarkable transformation. Architects from across the Habsburg Empire came to rebuild the city, bringing the latest ideas in architecture and urban planning with them. Elegant Art Nouveau buildings rose beside older streets. Modern water supply, electricity. The earthquake had damaged the old Ljubljana, but the rebuilding created a modern city. And nowhere is that transformation more visible than here, Prešeren Square. Several of the elegant buildings surrounding it appeared in the years after the earthquake. But at its center stands someone who represents a different kind of transformation: France Prešeren, Slovenia's greatest poet. Trubar had given Slovene a printed foundation. 300 years later, Prešeren gave it a powerful literary voice. His poetry demonstrated that Slovene could stand alongside Europe's great literary languages. Words from one of his poems would eventually become Slovenia's national anthem. Ljubljana had entered the modern age. But the empire that had ruled it for 6 centuries was beginning to collapse. The First World War was approaching. By the time the war ended, the Habsburg Empire was gone. Many Slovenes saw this as an opportunity for a country of their own. Instead, they became part of a new South Slavic state, the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, later known as Yugoslavia. Ljubljana was no longer a provincial Habsburg city. It was becoming the cultural center of the Slovenes. And the architect who would reshape the city for its new role had just returned home: Jože Plečnik. By then, he had already worked in Vienna and on Prague Castle. But Plečnik didn't want to imitate the grand capitals of the former empire. he understood Ljubljana's unique position between two worlds, the Mediterranean and Central Europe. So, he brought their influences together and created something unmistakably Ljubljana. Plečnik envisioned the city as one connected public space, almost like an outdoor living room. Triple Bridge isn't simply three bridges. It unites both sides of the river in one open public space. The central market doesn't turn away from the river, it opens toward it. His embankments, colonnades, staircases, terraces, and tree-lined walks invite people to slow down, meet, talk, and enjoy the city together. Much of the Ljubljana visitors fall in love with today isn't medieval or Baroque. It is Plečnik's Ljubljana. And his work forms part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized as an exceptional example of human-centered urban design. Plečnik gave Ljubljana a distinctive new identity. But Europe was heading toward another devastating war, and afterward, the city would enter into an entirely different world. By the time the war ended, Slovenia was one of 6 republics within socialist Yugoslavia, a communist state following its own path between East and West. And its capital, Ljubljana, had to represent this new political order. The clearest expression of that era stands here, Republic Square. It was designed by Edward Travnikar, a former student of Plečnik. But where Plečnik's Ljubljana feels intimate and inspired by the past, Republic Square feels monumental, modern, and deliberately new. 2 modernist towers rise above the open plaza. Nearby stand Parliament and the Monument to the Revolution. For decades, this square formed the political and cultural center of socialist Slovenia within Yugoslavia. But then, in June 1991, after centuries under foreign dynasties, empires, kingdoms, and federations, Slovenia declared its independence. Thousands gathered on the square for the national ceremony. For generations, Ljubljana had helped preserve the Slovene language, strengthen a national identity, and sustain the dream of independence and freedom. Now, in this square, that dream became real. For the first time, Ljubljana was the capital of an independent Slovenia. And suddenly, every place we visited fits together. It took nearly 6,000 years of legends, empires, wars, disasters, and reinvention to create the Ljubljana you see today. That's why Ljubljana is so much more than a list of attractions you see in travel guides. Every bridge, every square, and every street reveals another piece of one extraordinary story. And now, you don't just know what to visit, you understand Ljubljana. If you decide to come here, be sure to check out my favorite experiences and tickets by scanning the QR code or checking the description below. My name is Rock. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.